Hello, hello. My name is Vojta, and today I am going to talk about drag and drop for your website. Let me introduce myself. I work for Uber. We built this library called BaseWeb. BaseWeb is a React component library, and it's also a design system we use at Uber across all applications. If you wonder, is this component library any good? The answer is yes. It was released recently and also featured on Hacker News. It got about 150 comments. All of them were extremely positive. This is my favorite one by far. But let's talk about drag and drop now. So it turns out this concept is pretty old. It was invented in 1970s by Jeff Raskin. It was called click and drop. And Jeff Raskin is the person who was behind the first Apple Macintosh. So how come that even after 50 years, pretty much no front-end engineer wants to hear this question? Can you make this thing draggable? Why is it still like so painful? At least for me, I didn't want to hear this question. And one of our BaseWeb components needs to support it. It's a sortable list. It looks pretty simple. You can just drag and drop items and reorder them. But there are a lot of things behind this component, a lot of requirements. All our components need to be super flexible, which means you should be able to change the styles. Also, you should be able to even change DOM elements. It needs to be very accessible. It needs to support screen readers and keyboards. It needs to work on your phones. And also, it needs to load fast. We use React. We love React. Our whole component library is using React. So what we did first was to explore what's out there in the ecosystem. And there are some really good options. I think by far the best one and most polished one is called React Beautiful DND. It supports exactly our use case. It's loaded with features. It's very accessible. And it also works on your phones. The only downside of this library is it's really, really big. It's almost as big as React itself. Then there is React Sortable HOC. It's a little bit outdated library. It's much smaller. It has all the features, but it's not accessible. So that's no-go for us. And then there is React DND. It's kind of the OG of all the drag and drop libraries. And I will talk about it later a little bit. So my next thinking was, OK, 32 kilobytes, that's a lot for something so small as sortable list. Can we make this smaller? So I started looking into implementing this thing from scratch. So that brought me to Google and just searching for drag and drop MDN. And bingo, the first result, HTML drag and drop interfaces enable applications to use drag and drop features in Firefox and other browsers. That sounds really, really great. So you start reading through the API, and as you can see, there are about 8 different events, which I guess makes sense, right? Except it doesn't at all. Why do I need 8 different events if the whole interaction can be described by pretty much 3 different actions? You press the mouse, you move the mouse, you release the mouse. Why are there 8 different events? It turns out most of them are completely useless, but you still have to implement them to make other half of them work. And that's not the only problem. There's very bad support for mobile devices. The previews of direct items are very, very limited. It's very inconsistent across browsers. And the overall API is super, super confusing. So you might wonder, why is this thing so bad? HTML5 isn't at all. Why is the specification so awful? And the answer is interesting and might surprise you. And this doesn't work. So the answer is this spec was based on what IE6 implemented it at the time, which is like really, really awful browser. And the only thing about that browser is like being long, long dead. So OK, HTML5 API is just complete disaster, and like we just can't use it, I guess. What else we can do? Well, this is where React DND comes to the on the scene. If the native API is really, really bad, what can you do? You can just abstract it into a library. You can just hide all the quirks, and you can provide much nicer API to developers. And it makes a lot of sense. Unfortunately, some limitations are so severe, like support for mobile, that you can't really overcome it. So even React DND isn't that much help for this use case. So what's left? Well, you can go even lower, and you can just implement your own DND API. And this is how you can do it. First, you need to use like certain events, and there are 3 of them for mouse and 3 of them for touch. And this makes a lot of sense, because as we said, we need just like 3 different things to actually implement the whole thing: mouse down, mouse move, mouse up. Then you also need to track the mouse. This is pretty easy. All these events will give you exact position of the mouse on the screen. You need to measure elements. There's a nice API called getBoundingClientRect. It gives you precise coordinates and dimensions for each element on the page. So that's very convenient. You will need to position things on the page. As you are moving the element, you need to change its position. So a first naive solution could look like this. You would set position to fixed, and you would keep updating top and left coordinates. But the problem with this solution is it's very, very slow, and like it will be sluggish in your browser. Your CPU will go to 100%, and it doesn't look nice. Fortunately, there is a much better solution. You can use CSS transformations. And there is this property called transform translate. So you can use that instead of left and top. There is also transition duration that you can use for animating the whole transformation over the time. It's GPU accelerated, so it's very efficient, and it looks smoother too. There are also other DOM APIs you will probably need, like window get computed style, which gives you styles, like final styles of each element. And there are like a bunch of APIs if you need to support like scrolling and like scrolling positions. Then there is this thing about positioning elements on the page. If you have some element that should float above the rest of the interface and be truly independent, then you actually need to take it out of the flow and place it to the bottom of page. If you keep it in the same position in the React DOM, like some parent element can interfere with the positioning, and it can be broken. So to ensure that, we can use this React API that takes the element and just places it at the bottom of page, like React Portal. And this is how the algorithm works if you put all the pieces together. On the left side, you can see what happens if you start the dragging operation. If you click on the middle element, we set the visibility to hidden. So it's invisible, but at the same time, it doesn't change positions of other elements. And at the same time, you render it again, but at the bottom of page. You give it initial top and left coordinates. And once you start moving this element around, you will be updating only the transform translate property. So you will get that nice, smooth animation. And on the right side, you can see what happens if you move this element down and you reach the boundaries of the third element. In that case, you need to move or animate the last element to the middle. And the only thing you need to do is apply, again, transform translate to it and just bump it 100 pixels up in this case. As you can see, like we still didn't change the order of elements in the DOM. And we can do that once the drop happens. And this is a pretty straightforward solution. There are like other strategies how you can implement this, but this works pretty well. All right, so let's talk about accessibility. Like imagine you can see the monitor and you still need to interact with this thing. There are like few things you can do and you definitely should do. Each element should be described with a role description where you need to announce to the user like, hey, this is draggable element and this is like what shortcuts you can use to interact with it. And then you will probably need to give user even more guidance and more messages along the process. And there is this thing called live regions that you can add to your website. It's a div, and whatever child you pass to it, whatever text you pass into that, the screen reader will pick it up and will read it to the user. Aria live assertive means that this setting is very aggressive. So the screen reader always interrupts all previous messages and will start reading the new one. So let's take an example how this works. So this is our movable list. We are now using our keyboard. So first thing we need to do is like to focus the first element. So we hit the tab, and we get this message in our screen reader. You are currently at the draggable item at position 1. Press spacebar to lift, and there are 6 items. So you press the spacebar, and you get the next message. You lifted item at position 1, press J to move down, K to move up, spacebar to drop, or escape to cancel. So now you are technically dragging the item around. You press the J, and you get another message. You move the lifted item down to position 2, and you can finally confirm this drag and drop operation with hitting spacebar again. So we hit the spacebar again, and finally you get the last message. You have dropped the item. It has moved from position 1 to position 2. So now you can use this whole thing without even seeing it, and that's like really important. Let's take a look at the API of this component. It's actually pretty simple. There are just 2 props you have to implement. The first one is items, where you pass the array of items or labels. And every single time the drop is finished, this callback will be triggered, and it will give you the old index and new index. It's up to you to update the array of items or reorder it. So this is nice. Like, this works great for our developers. But then I was thinking, OK, what if I want to use other elements? Like, this could be useful to more people. What if I, for example, don't want to use lists, but tables instead? Like, that would be nice. Or what if the list is very, very long, and I need to add more features like auto-scrolling when I reach the boundaries of the container? So it made a lot of sense to me. This thing should be its like standalone library that can be used independently on base web, and it should be more flexible. So that's how react-movable was created. Now the important question is how to make the API more flexible so people can actually use it for tables and other things. So you have a couple options in React. There are a couple different strategies. The OG of all patterns, higher order components. It works great. My only gripe with this API is that it creates these hidden relationships between the HOC and the component. It's passing some props, you don't see them, and that's a little bit annoying. You could use hooks. Like, hooks are great for everything these days. But when I was working on this library, hooks were not released yet. So then the most logical option was render props. And this is what render props are doing, or that's how they look like. This is official React Create Context API. And the whole trick is that we are passing function as a child to our components. So in this case, you can see that consumer is passing down a value, and it's up to you how you use this value in your span component in this example. So this is really nice because you can explicitly see what data are going through. So if we update our component and to make it more flexible, we just need to add 2 more props. One is called render list, and it renders the container. The only thing you need to do is just spread the props that you are getting from it. And the same thing applies for the render item. You just need to spread the props you are getting from the function. And this code actually works. It's like nothing fancy. There are no styles, no opinions. But you can just drag and drop it. You can also use keyboard, and like this whole thing is like working right now, so that's good. Then testing. We need to test this thing. We can't just ship the code without tests. And there are a couple different ways how to test things. Like you can do unit testing. The problem with this library is it's using dozens of DOM APIs. So how do you test that as a unit? You could abstract all of these calls, or you could mark them. But what are you testing at that point? So it makes much more sense to rely on end-to-end tests. And for end-to-end tests, there is this great library called Puppeteer that lets you to control your Chrome browser. And as you can see, the test for drag and drop can get very, very simple and descriptive. Like in this case, for the mouse, we are pressing the mouse, moving the mouse, releasing the mouse, and then we are checking the order of items. So this is kind of like nice descriptive test you can get. And the same thing can be done for keyboard. You are just pressing different keys. But there is also this another class of bugs that you have to deal with. Even if the order is correct, the spacing can be a little bit off. So how do you capture that? Well, you can use visuals regression testing. And there is this library called just image snapshot. How does this work? You take a screenshot one time, you take it second time, and it compares them. And it highlights the pixels that are different. You can set some threshold, and if you reach that threshold, the test will fail. So this way, you can just test if your styling and positioning is also correct. So OK, we shipped this library. It works in Chrome, but then you open it in IE, and nothing works. So you start panicking and looking through the red wall of errors. But fortunately, it's not so bad. There are just few small things you have to solve. There's one bug. For some reason, IE and Edge don't support transform translate for table rows. So you don't get animations for tables, but we can live with that. And some scroll APIs are called differently. So you have to use some like other APIs. But that's not a big deal. All right, so you fix it for IE. You can ship it again. And like bang, it doesn't work in Safari at all. And this is a much bigger problem than Chrome. And the thing here is, like Safari doesn't support CSS property, touch action, none. And this is very useful CSS property because you can use it to disable touch scrolling. And if you think about it, the touch scrolling is exactly the same gesture as drag and drop on your phones. So if it's not disabled, the whole thing is not going to work well. And specifically, it's not going to work on your iPhone. Even like IE is like supporting this CSS property, but Safari not really. So what else you can do? If CSS is not good enough, you can use JavaScript. And you can just do touch start, and you can apply prevent default to that event. But there is, again, like another glitch with this. In 2017, the Chrome team decided to launch the intervention, and they basically break the web. What was the breaking change? The touch start started ignoring prevent default by default. So if you actually want to call prevent default on the touch start, you have to make your event listener active, which means using this third optional parameter and setting passive to false. And Chrome wasn't the only browser that did this. Like Safari, like pretty soon followed the suit. So if you want to make this thing work in Safari, you need to use this third parameter, which doesn't sound like a big deal until you are relying on React events. And React events actually never added support for passive event listeners. So that's pretty bad. Like if you've implemented all the events with React events, like it's not going to work. So the solution here is like forgetting React event system and just go native. Just use document.event listener everywhere and bunch of refs to just use the real elements instead. OK, so we fixed it for Safari. And we can celebrate. This was our main goal, to make this thing smaller. And we achieved that. It's about 10 times smaller than other solutions we were about to use. And like, what's my conclusion here? So if you can, you should probably use some existing library. But there are a lot of trade-offs that these libraries are doing, like in terms of size, or they are dropping support for phones, or they are maybe not accessible. So be careful and like test it well. If nothing really fits your needs, you should consider just implementing this thing from scratch. It's a little bit painful, but it's doable. Just maybe avoid HTML5 API. It's not that great. Use mouse and touch events instead. If you need to move elements around, you should not use top and left. You should definitely use CSS transformations. It's more efficient and faster. You will need to measure a lot of things, and there are really good APIs for that, like get-bounding plan rect. If you want to use React events with this whole thing, you will have really bad times. So you should just start right away with native events. It's really important to make anything accessible. And in this case, it's not that hard. You just need to apply correct area labels, role description, and also area life. And for testing, unit testing will be pretty hard to implement, but you can write really nice and descriptive tests with Puppeteer. And finally, there is like one more thing. Right after this library, we also added another component, which is a React range. And it's using exactly the same principles as sortable list. So yeah, if you need to build more components using this interaction, it's not that hard. And you should definitely like check out both of these libraries. Also, you can add me on Twitter. And also, I'll be around, so we can chat. Thank you.
Question time. Any question, guys?
Thanks, great talk. Just extremely useful, just for exactly for me with my current project. The question is, what about different size components? I mean, draggable elements of different sizes when you have to calculate the positions in line.
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, excuse me. How does this library work with components that are draggable and that are of different heights and widths?
Yeah, like that's like an extra consideration that this library had to do. And that's like why you need to kind of measure all the elements separately, and you have to do a little bit more math. But it's not like a big deal. You can definitely implement it. This library supports it too, so that's why we do all the measuring.
Yeah. Thanks.
Hi, thank you. Does it work only with plain list, or can I use it like while creating sort of calendar with draggable cards and not only items?
So this thing works only in the like vertical direction. So that's what makes it also like much smaller, because we don't have to support like horizontal directions. And then you can actually use any element. So it can be list, it can be table, it can be even something much bigger. It doesn't matter. But it works only in single direction.